So I saw the all caps. I saw the Truth Social screenshot, and I've got to say, now I'm going to surprise you, this is actually really good news. A week ago, Donald Trump jumped on Truth Social to announce his pick for a new commissioner for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Those of us in the know call it the BLS. Here's what the president said. His words. For many years, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, under weak and stupid, those are all caps, people, has been failing American businesses, policymakers, and families by releasing very inaccurate numbers. So far, nothing is said as true. That is why I fired the former commissioner. He did fire the former commissioner. We'll talk about why in a moment. But here's the interesting part. And I'm pleased to nominate the very talented Brett Matsumoto as the next commissioner. Now, you've probably never heard of Brett Matsumoto. And right now I'd happily show you a picture of him, but there's actually none available. And believe it or not, that's a good thing. Because Brett, he's one of us. He's a nerd. The best kind of nerd. He's a serious statistician. He's a career bureaucrat who's been quietly working at the BLS for the past 15 years trying to improve the quality of our statistics. Now, you may not know that much about the BLS either, but it has an incredibly important role in our economy. It's the official scorekeeper for jobs, the unemployment rate. It measures what's going on with wages. It measures the cost of living that goes into the Social Security adjustments and changes in contracts. Its numbers shape everything from everyday business decisions to government policy to your grandmother's Social Security and what the Fed's going to do. And so Trump made this big announcement. And to really understand it and why, despite being riddled with falsehoods, it's actually really good news for America's institutions. You need to know the full story. So strap in. I'm here to tell you a story. It's a story in 3 acts. I've fast forwarded to the 3rd act, but let's go back to Act 1, which began 6 months ago. Let me take you to Tokyo. It was the summer holidays, and my family and I were over in Tokyo. We're visiting the Cabinet Office, which is sort of the kind of thing economists do on their summer vacations. And it was 5 a.m. I was asleep. My better half woke me up. Betsy Stevenson, she's an economist too. She used to be the chief economist at the Labor Department. And she woke me up. She told me, Juz, at 5 a.m. Juz, he fired the BLS commissioner. And I woke up immediately. I was shocked. Now, I tell you this story not to give you a sense of the quality of pillow talk among economists. I hope it's better for you in your own life, but rather to give you a sense of the seriousness of what this was. This was a fellow economist who happens to share a life with me, who thought it was so important she had to wake up the fella next to her in order to explain what had happened. And that's because firing the BLS commissioner for telling the truth is something that has simply never happened before in the United States. Doesn't happen in serious countries, and has never happened in anything except the most tin pot of backwater dictatorships. So this felt unheard of. So what was the story? The BLS commissioner is a woman by the name of Erica McAntifer. Now, she just released the latest jobs numbers. There was no evidence of any wrongdoing. All she'd done is compiled the numbers honestly. And she had communicated to the president and the broader public exactly what her job is, which is an accurate assessment of the state of the labour market. The truest truth as she understood it. She released those numbers, as she does every month. And the president, confronted with evidence that the labour market was not doing well, didn't adjust his labour market policies, his macroeconomic policies. He shot the messenger. He fired Erica McAntifer on the spot. So that's what happened. Now, is that the whole story? You might say, well, is that the story Trump told? And to be honest, I'm loath to spend a lot of time digging into what the president said, given that the president has a tenuous relationship with the truth. But you may be curious about how all the different stories fit together. So what was Trump's version? He claimed it had to do with downward revisions to the prior month's jobs data. Now, that all sounds very wonky. Basically, they'd taken their assessment, the Bureau had taken its assessment of what it thought had happened last month, and it had updated that assessment. He said that this was proof that the numbers were rigged. Now, at this point, you need to know a little bit about statistics, and you might be asking, well, what is the deal with revisions anyway? Well, let me explain. Remember, this was jobs dates, the day that the Bureau of Labour Statistics reports out its estimate of the number of Americans who have jobs. Fair enough. How do we get those numbers? Well, the Bureau of Labour Statistics essentially surveys a bunch of companies across the country, and they say to them how many people are on your payroll. That's why we call them payrolls. Now, it turns out that some businesses don't return their surveys straight away. Fair enough, they've got other things to do. That puts the Bureau of Labour Statistics in a funny position because it is under pressure to release numbers in a timely fashion, perhaps using the numbers that it's got, but it's also under pressure to be as accurate as possible. So how does it deal with this? What it does is it takes all of the surveys that have come in by the time that they want to release their numbers, and it understands it's an incomplete count, and it uses that to come up with an estimate of the number of people on non-farm payrolls. Fair enough. We then have a timely measure. The Fed and other people can adjust based on this, but we should understand it's a preliminary estimate. What happens over the next few weeks? Well, a few more businesses get around to sending in their numbers. So we have more information, a better assessment of what's going on, because it's not just the early responders, it's all the responders. So now, in an attempt to go back and make sure that we have the most accurate numbers we do, the BLS now has more information. What should it do? Should it slam its fist on the table and say, no, we've released the truth and the truth is what we said it was last month? Or should it say, more information has come to hand, we're going to give revised guidance based on that? Well, it does the latter. And so now it releases a new number that's based on all the surveys that have come in, both the early ones and the later ones. That's called the revised number. And so what turns out is that the early estimates sometimes are revised up and sometimes are revised down. Yes, I understand for a non-statistician, this might all feel very weird, but the thing I want you to understand is the willingness of the Bureau of Labour Statistics to update its views when it gets more information. That's actually good news. That's a reason to trust them. That's a commitment to truth. That helps you understand just what's in those numbers. So anyway, that's Trump's story. So Act 1, he fired the BLS commissioner, apparently for no reason. Well, this brings us to Act 2. We now have a Bureau of Labour Statistics. We have an economy we need to measure, but we don't have a commissioner. So what next? Well, this is where Trump now needs to find someone for that job. So if you're looking for a BLS commissioner, you might place a help wanted ad. What sorts of qualifications would you look for? Historically, this is not a political position. We're looking for a serious statistician, an economist, someone who understands labour markets and statistics and sampling theory. You're also looking for a good manager. The Bureau of Labour Statistics is one of the largest employers of economists in the world. Last I checked, I think there's about 2,000 people there. So Trump goes looking, and who does he pick? He nominates a guy by the name of E.J. Antoni. Funny, he's only got initials, not names. Fair enough. What are E.J.'s credentials? Well, he does have a PhD. Beyond that, well, he's never actually done any economics research. His dissertation has only ever earned one citation, and that citation was by one of his co-workers at a right-wing Texas think tank. This is a guy who simply is underqualified for the job. In fact, based on his qualifications, his formal qualifications, he probably wouldn't have gotten an entry-level job at the Bureau of Labour Statistics. So what does Trump choose to do? He chooses him to head the organization, to be the leader of an organization he wasn't qualified to be a member of. Why would Trump do this? Well, let's look at E.J. Antoni's other qualifications. What did he have? He had an active social media account. He had a very uncomfortable relationship with the truth. Sometimes he's for it and sometimes he prefers his own version. He is perhaps the only economist in the United States who just happened, to be at the Capitol on January 6th. I think you have a sense of what his qualifications were. Now, remember, this is a job to run the Bureau of Labour Statistics. He's never run a bureau. He doesn't work on labour. And the only thing he's ever done with statistics is either misunderstand them or misrepresent them. That's a triple negative. Double negative might be a positive. Triple negative, that's really bad. So what ultimately happened to this nomination? As all of this came out, and as there was a public outcry, as it became clear this was the least qualified nominee ever in the history of the organisation, the most partisan, the least committed to truth, the least suitable for the job, Trump didn't back down. But the Senate stood up, and it became increasingly clear that he wouldn't be able to get this guy through Senate confirmation. And as a result, Trump withdrew the nomination. Now, I just want to pause on that. Trump was ready to keep going. It was the Senate who stopped him. Okay, that's the end of Act 2. Let's fast forward to today. Last week, Act 3. And Act 3 is where we introduce or reintroduce an earlier character, Brett Matsumoto. Who is Brett? He's the sort of serious economist with a commitment to statistics and truth and the qualifications and the PhD and the research record that any other president would have appointed to run the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is incredibly normal. This is a fellow who's published on all sorts of statistical issues, on how to measure the economy during COVID, how best to understand poverty. He spent the last few years working on how best to measure the cost of living. And there's some really tricky conceptual issues there when you're thinking about things like how to measure the price of health insurance and the like. He had been at the Bureau of Labor Statistics for 15 years. And here's an interesting point. He's currently on detail to the Council of Economic Advisors. And I think that's maybe how he got the eye of the president and his advisors. Now, you might say, oh, if this is a guy who was working in the Council of Economic Advisors, doesn't that sometimes attract highly politicized partisan people? Historically, the answer, I think, is a mixed maybe. In this administration, almost definitely, but not for Brett Matsumoto, because his was a different type of appointment. Sometimes the White House discovers that it doesn't have enough internal expertise and its political networks aren't finding it the people it wants. And so it reaches out to the broader public service and says, we need some people with specific forms of expertise. Could you send them over here to work for a year? And that's what it means to, quote, be on detail. A senior public servant is often detailed to specific roles within the White House. And that's what Brett was on. And so the fact that he'd worked inside the executive office actually is not indicative at all of him having particularly strong partisan leanings. This story is good news, and we ought to tell these stories. When this story first broke in Act 1 and Act 2, it was the front page of every newspaper. That we had a win that our institutions held barely made the news anywhere. And so it's a win, it's good news, and it's news that we tell too rarely. This is a story that tells us that destruction's not a given. As we explain this case, what I think really matters is if we can understand the case, we can speak slowly, we can speak clearly to the broader public and people in Washington, we can make a difference. And as people come to understand the debates and the stakes, yeah, we can prevent the most stupid thing from happening. And we did it.